Today we're looking at PT10 Game 4. It's an ancient game. I'm surprised that anything this sophisticated even existed back whenever this prep test was made, because I was still like a child. But anyways, it's really one that's going to kind of try your abilities to the max. And you're probably going to encounter it pretty early on in your prep, since it's such an early prep test. So don't get too freaked out if you have trouble with it. It took me probably close to 10 minutes to do this. And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it takes you considerably longer this first time around. Here I went with a little different approach, and I drew my setup to start with because it's kind of a long setup to draw, and I wanted it to be somewhat pretty. So what we're doing here is we've got a soloist playing 6 different guitar concertos, and it's on Sunday for 6 consecutive weeks. So we know right away that there's an ordering component, right? And probably because they present that ordering component first, it's easy to get a little focused on that. But now we have another task that comes in. There's more concertos. This is them all lined up. We got 3 by Giuliani, 4 by Rodrigo, 3 by Vivaldi. There's way more concertos than there are spots to put them on these Sundays, right? So this is also a classic in-out game. So it's a combination game where we're doing both grouping, we're deciding which one of these concertos get played at all. And then we've also, once we've got our concertos that are in the in-group, we got to order them. Bing, bam, boom. So yeah, a lot going on. And when I set this game up, I was trying to think, okay, well, I scanned down and all the rules seem to relate to the grouping, right? The in and the out stuff. There's only a couple rules that they poke in at the end about the ordering aspect. So I wanted to make sure I had a good orderly way to write my groups out and decide who's getting played and who's not before I even worry about this part down below. So I kind of set it up with, this is my outside over here, and this is my inside. And then once we know who's in, then we can line them up as needed. But as with many in and out games, there's a lot of inferences you can make just by, knowing who's out then tells you who's in, and vice versa. So we'll get to see a lot of that in action here when I start this up. So for our rules, first we get a pretty straightforward conditional reasoning rule, N, then J. So if N is selected, then J is selected. So it might be more helpful for us if those were members of the same group, but they're not. If you wanted to take a look at what it would look like up here, N in, then J in, there in the Giuliani group. So I keep going, looking at the next rule. If M is selected, neither J nor O is selected. So M, then J, and O. Not J and not O. And be careful with your quantifier there. A lot of people say no, see nor, and that means to them or, but that's just not right. It's M, then not J, and not O. They both have to be gone. So that might look a little more fruitful soon because M and O are on the same team. So those dudes, they can't ever be on the same side. And you can write that right into your diagram if you want. M then not O, M then not O would be like MO is here, M or O is here. If one's in, one has to be out. And so if we were to look at the contrapositive of that, right, it'd be O or J, then not M. I don't know why that M got so messed up. And, when you see that, you can tack it right on up here. Sorry, not M. Not M. And then we can also add, this O also going to that M. if J happens, not M, if O happens, not M. Remember, when you see this, yeah, we've got it linked together here, but that's really, in essence, two separate rules. O, then not M, right? And J, then not M. So it's perfectly reasonable to do what I just did here and add it on. And in the end, we don't end up needing any of this contrapositive stuff. We can just write it in one place right up here, as an experienced test taker. I'm just writing this contrapositive of this straight in up here. J, then not M, O, then not M. And you can go a little further, which is kind of a way of reversing this whole chain up here. Well, the contrapositive of this N, then J rule is not J, then not N, right? So I would combine that right away right here so that we have these two chains that we're working with that are expressing the same rules just differently, and that's going to help us see the connections here as we move along. And this one's a big time rule, because if you see here, if M's in, then that means both O and N are out, right? So in essence, when you say I poke M in, I immediately know who's on this side. It's O and then N. And then that means P is with M over here, right? So what that really means is that whenever M pops up, you know you need P in as well, right? Let me go over that logic just one more time here. If M's in, it kicks out two other members of the Rodrigo concerto group, right? So that means that P is the only one left since N and O are gone, and that means that if M's in, you have to pop P in as well. And we can write the contrapositive of that rule here, P then not M, not P then not M. So now we've got these two chains that are kind of mirror images of each other, and we're getting a lot of information we can work with later in the game. Our next rule, if X is selected, then neither Z nor P can be selected. So we've got X selected, then Z's out, and P is out. And, it might behoove you to add that onto the chains where you can. X, then not P, right up there. And then the contrapositive here is not P, then not X. So M, then not X. So we've got a whole lot going on here. It might help you to kind of keep some sort of a line in between these two so that you aren't confusing the charts if you're trying to keep things straight visually here. And then our next rule is finally one about ordering, right? And it tells us that X can't be fifth unless there is a Rodrigo concert on the first Sunday. So then we'd have to have one, and then there's a Rodrigo concert there. Yeah, and that's a complicated rule to write out. But I think if you write like an R here, you get in the danger of confusing R with being a concerto. So in this case, I like to just put it as a little R here, and then I know some variable or other is going to go in this blank spot. Okay, so if X is fifth, then we need to have a Rodrigo concert in first, and if there's not an R in that first spot, then we know X can't be fifth. X is not 5. And then it looks like I just missed a rule. I often seem to do this. If J and O are selected, then J is played at some time before O. So you got another conditional rule, J and O, then J before O. So it's one last annoying thing to keep track of. And normally I say the rules are your friends and they help you narrow down possibilities. Here it's getting a bit annoying to juggle all this stuff in your head. What you really have to be aware of is all of these chains, that we have to work with here. So when you're looking at a variable, you're automatically going to be, seeing how it plays out up top. Also, with in and out games, you always have to be thinking about any inferences you can make about, like this one we made right here. Well, if MO, MO are taking up these two spots, the only remaining thing here that can go in is N and P, right? So we know we've got N and P there. Those two can never be together. And then down here we've got another rule, this X and Z. Those are both Vivaldi concertos. So we know that when you have a rule like this in an in and out game, right, that limits things. So we know X and Z are always out, right? We know that one of X and Z is always in, and one of them is always out. Otherwise, it'd be violating this rule. And then there's only one guy left who has to be in all the time, Z. Do we have anything like this with H, J, and K? No. H and J are H and K are not even mentioned. They're basically free variables. They're not even mentioned in any of our rules. So we don't really know too much about what's going on up in the G group. There's a lot of flexibility there still. Okay, so with this, I'm pretty much ready to go on to the answer choices to the questions. And I'm going to skip question 13, or question 19 rather, because it's just an acceptability question. So you do it the same way, taking your rules one at a time, seeing where they're violated, and you'll be left with one acceptable order. So nothing interesting to see there. Let's move on to 20. So I wrote a little duplicate of our diagram that we can work with, and we just remember that this is the G column, this is the Rodrigo column, this is the Vivaldi row, G row, R row, V row. Okay, so we will take a look at our question 20 here, and it's giving us all 6 concertos to be played. And so we know we've got J, K are in. That means H is out. And then N, O are in, which means M and P are out. And then we have Y and Z in, and X is out. And you might want to know quickly that this follows all the rules that we've got written here, so we know we did a good job setting this game up. And then it asks us then, if N is to be played on the first Sunday, which cannot be played on the second Sunday. We also know that J and O are in, right? So that's the key rule, because remember, we're looking at an ordering question. They're asking who can't be second. So the key thing to do is think about, okay, what are our remaining ordering rules? It doesn't look like this one's going to come into play because, that's talking about spot 5, right? So our only thing we know is J and O are in. The only person who can't possibly go here is O. Then there's no room for J. So without even having to look at the answer choices yet, I know J is our right answer. O is our correct answer. And C, O is our correct answer. No way you can have O in 2, otherwise there's no room for J. 21. J, O, and Y are the first 3 concertos to be played, not necessarily in the order given. Although we do know something, which is that if J and O are in, it's got to be, J then O. So, this is going to get a little tricky to write, but in fact, my program is not even liking that I'm trying to draw that small. So that group is in these first 3, right? J, O, Y. It's good to know there's only 3 combinations possible of those. J, O, Y, J, Y, O, Y, J, O, right? But anyways, that's our rule to begin with. And they're asking about that 5th Sunday. I'm thinking for sure this rule is coming into play. So of J, O, and Y, say that X is on the 5th, right? Well, then we need a Rodrigo concert. to be first. And the only Rodrigo consort we have in this batch of J-O-Y is O. But O cannot be first because J has to be in front of it. J-O-Y. Right? So there's no way to have X fifth. I'm immediately looking if X is an option for this, and yes, it is, E. So not too hard there. Anyone who's been doing the test for a while will have the intuition that, okay, if they're asking about this fifth spot, we have a rule that directly talks about that. That's the first place I'm going to look to make my inference about who can't go there. Okay, 22, if O is selected for the first Sunday. So you got O here in the first Sunday. No, that's not Rodrigo. Oh, that is a Rodrigo consort. So it still is an option to have X over here in fifth. What's the following concerto that must also be selected? Well, the first thing is I look at, like, O, okay, is connected to this rule here. If we had J and O both in, having O first would not be possible, right? Because J needs to be in front of O in that situation. So we know J is out right away. We put J out up in our G column. That means H and K are in. That's a pretty big inference. I'm going to see if that answered the question. Who must also be selected? One of H and K. A, J, no. B, K, yeah. We already know H has to be in. So actually the questions here are turning out a little bit easier than maybe I imagined when I was first doing this very difficult setup. 23 asks us a concerto that must be selected. And I quickly realized that I had actually written in the wrong variable here. You know, X and Z have to be like this. The inference we can make there is that Y has to be in. So I had Z written there. My apologies if that confused anyone. Feel free to yell at me in the comments. But anyways, we know it's Y that has to be in. So this question asks us, what's a concerto that must be selected? I'm right away looking for Y, and that's the answer in D. And if you hadn't figured that out in your main setup, you got to remember that with in and out games, it's crucial to always make inferences based on what variables you have remaining, right? So if you start to see that you've filled up some spots over in the outside, it's time to check and see who that might force into the inside. And same with if you start learning something about, you know, the inside, who does that force into the outside, right? And when we learn that X and Z can't play nicely together and they have to be in separate groups, that leaves Y stuck in the remaining spot, which was here on our inside. 24, our last question, says, who's a concerto that cannot be selected together with N? And, you know, I just look in this chain first. I'm hoping they've got M in there. Yeah, and they do. Perfect. So if we did our chains right, that's like the easiest thing in the world and made our inferences. Easiest question in the world. So I guess I take back what I said about this game being super, super difficult. It's been a while since I did it, and I must have been misremembering it somewhat. But the setup is really hard, right? But if you can get this setup stuff done, you're going to be pretty happy answering the questions. So this is really just a test of your ability to set up the game. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this one. Talk to you soon.